Good morning. My name's Toni Smith. I'm the Principal Aboriginal Health Worker across Sydney Local Health District, and I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people this morning whose land we are on, whose land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm zooming in from Bidjigal country, where I live, and I was born on Gadigal country, and my grandmother was born on Yuin Nation. I would like to pay respects to all ancestors and elders of all those nations and every nation across Australia and wherever you're zooming in this morning. I'd like to welcome my Aboriginal brothers and sisters and also all the non-Aboriginal people that have zoomed into this webinar. Good morning.
Thank you, Toni, and we will be hearing from you again shortly. As I said, we have a panel of 11 contributors. I'm not going to introduce them to you individually now, otherwise that would take up some very precious time that we want to allow at the end of this forum for you to ask questions, which you can do via the chat section, which you can see on your screen. But the people on the panel are social workers, solicitors, we've got 2 representatives from the police, we've got clinicians, and we've got managers of key services. So really an absolutely fantastic spread of expertise. As I said, I'm the Older Women's Network ambassador. I am also a carer for my elderly mother who lives with me. And as a journalist, I have written about aspects of elder abuse for The Guardian and moderated similar forums for Compass, the National Elder Abuse Portal. So today our objectives are to raise awareness and demonstrate best practice in responding to abuse of older people using a real life case study as the starting point for our panel discussion. If you can't stay with us this morning for the whole session, if there's a sort of time pressure on you, please put your question in the chat and precede it with an exclamation mark, which will tell us that you are in a hurry and we will try and prioritize you. You can choose gallery or speaker view, but please mute yourself for this forum so that we don't hear background noises. And as I said, turn your phones to silent. I'd now like to ask Mary Chianta to give us a brief overview of how this collaborative in the Inner West came about. Mary is one of the founders of the collaborative and works for the Inner West Council as the Healthy Aging Program's supervisor. So welcome, Mary.
Thanks, Caroline. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting on. For me, that's Gadigal Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to Aboriginal colleagues with us here today. The Canterbury City Community Centre, when I started in my role, suggested to me that we start an Inner West region. At that time, it was Inner West and Canterbury Collaborative. We're the Inner West Region Collaborative today. We've been going since late 2017. And we have about 16 active members, which is fantastic. I'm not going to introduce them all because many are on the panel today. And we can send you the list of our local Inner West Region Elder Abuse Collaborative along with other material after the webinar. We're here, many collabs across the state, to support the New South Wales Ageing and Disability Commission by responding to local issues and needs. But really it's about creating awareness of abuse of older people living in the community with a focus on prevention and early intervention. We're local champions. We're building our own knowledge, but we're also really collaborating to strengthen local referral pathways, to raising awareness about abuse of older people in the community and improving the identification and best practice response to people living in the community, and for community members to seek support. So we have developed local tools and resources. We've developed a resource card for service providers, and also we're developing a community card which we're hoping to launch later in the year that will be translated into some community languages. We've had several of these forums now for service providers and also community member forums, which is fantastic, and some cultural and linguistically diverse specific information sessions that our active collaborative members participate in, and we work collaboratively to offer support. It's not uncommon for us to workshop specific issues that come our way from other organisations that aren't sure what to do and how to support somebody. And we also are very, very present because we have these resources that we wanted to promote to the community at many events across the region, across our Inner West region, which is the broader Commonwealth defined Inner West region, not the local government area, if that makes sense. So we border onto Canterbury Bankstown Council and Burwood, etc., etc. So we welcome everybody here today and very happy to be able to deliver this forum and to promote and to strengthen the referral pathways in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you also for choosing such a beautiful background, which kind of provides a little bit of escapism. I gather that you want me to mention the fact that there may be planes flying overhead. For people who don't know, a plane is a large metal object with wings that takes people to and from other countries. You know, it's really getting to that point, isn't it? I should just also mention that this seminar forum collective is, of course, being recorded. So if you miss any of it, if you want to share it, it will be available later on. And when you are about to leave, later on, please don't forget to fill out the poll. We would like some feedback on this session, how useful it's been to you, whether you would like to attend other similar sessions, what you would like to know more about. That kind of poll is really, really important to us. If you're having any technical problems, we have the wonderful Sandra in the back room running mission control. Pop the problem that you're having in the chat box, and hopefully Sandra will be able to sort it out for you. She's been able to do that so far for all of us. And just one final note to everybody concerning safety. We are talking about a difficult subject, the abuse of older people, and it can be a confronting topic. And it's really important that you ensure your own self-care and participate in a way that feels safe for you. So if you feel in any way impacted by the session, you should stop listening in, take the time that you need, perhaps debrief with a supervisor, employance assistance program, or contact the collaborative. I did a session 2 or 3 weeks ago about coercive control, and it was a very, very sensitive and very, at times, harrowing conversation, but it was also incredibly uplifting because it was so truthful and powerful, and we really felt like something useful was happening in the room. But these things are all about your own personal thresholds of safety, so you need to look after yourself first before you can look after anybody else. So please take that time. I would now like to ask Sandra whether she would like to put up the video that we're going to use as the basis for this conversation. Now, this is a video that is based on a real case study of a woman who was admitted to hospital, and it's based on the notes of the social worker who interacted with her in hospital. Here we go.
I've lived in my own house for 65 years now. I've been alone since my husband passed away 10 years ago. I'll be 83 this year. And I've been managing, but just some aches and pains, but managing. About 6 months ago, my grandson, he came to live with me. He said he needed a place to stay for a few weeks. And I said, of course, that's what we're here for, isn't it, family? That's what families do. He said he'd just stay for a few weeks, but he hasn't left yet. I don't want to complain, but I'm on a pension. It's a bit hard. He doesn't pay for anything, and I don't really want to ask him for money, so I buy the groceries. And I'm finding that hard to manage. I need to pay the bills and feed the two of us, you know. It is hard. I don't want to complain or make a fuss, but Michael scares me. I don't know where he gets his temper from, his nasty temper. It's definitely not from my side of the family. He gets angry so quick, you know. I get frightened when he gets mad. He's been in jail before, and you know he's my grandson. I don't want to get him into trouble with the law. And I don't want to say this, but it's hard. Things are not getting any better. I worry a lot. Sometimes he comes home in a really bad mood and he yells at me. He says I moved his stuff around, or I haven't washed his shirts, or I haven't ironed his shirts properly. I do try very hard, you know. He's my grandson. But there's always something I don't do right. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just too old. I really don't want to complain, but I have to be so careful. I don't know what I do which sets him off. He pushed me over once before. I didn't know what to do. I'm not very strong, so I just fell over. And he laughed at me, and that hurt me a lot. I asked myself, what did I do to deserve this? And he didn't even help me to get up. I can't do anything about him. It keeps me awake at night. I'm really not feeling right. My health hasn't been good lately. My heart's not good, and my legs are not good. And I don't know how long my pacemaker's going to last. I'm really not good. It's just that my house is not my house anymore. He's there, and I don't know when he's going to shout at me. If I want to talk to my daughter, I have to take my phone into the bathroom so he doesn't hear. I know I'm old enough for one of those home care packages. In fact, I got one. But Michael says he's my carer. Can you believe this? He said I don't need a stranger coming into the house. He doesn't want anyone interfering in my life, he said. I can't talk to anyone about this. He's my grandson, you know. I don't want to get him into trouble.
Well, I'm sure that film will resonate with many of you. I should just tell you that Marguerite, the part of Marguerite, was played there by a member of the Older Women's Network's theatre group, and the film was actually edited by a volunteer. It is based on a real woman who was actually hospitalized following a fall. And her situation came to light following a discussion with an inpatient social worker. So that takes me straight into our forum. And the first question to Aleksandra Branezac, who works for the Sydney Local Health District as the Senior Inpatient Aged Care Social Worker in the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. So welcome, Aleksandra. Can you please start by telling us what you would do as an inpatient social worker if you were assigned to see Marguerite?
Thank you. If I picked up Marguerite as a referral, there would be a few things that I would consider. So I'll give a little bit of an overview of what sort of my intervention would look like and things I would consider when I'm working with Marguerite. So the first initial thing that I would do is actually have a conversation with the multidisciplinary team and explain that I've received a referral, that there might be sort of some red flags for elder abuse. And I'd have a conversation with the medical team to see if there are any current concerns around Marguerite's cognition or ability to sort of make decisions, because this would sort of inform the steps moving forward in my intervention. I'd also speak to the physio to get an understanding of her mobility following the fall and, the steps in place if she's likely to require rehab. It would also be really important to review her EMR history and look at sort of have there been any other previous admissions, what was the reason for her presentation, has she presented with injuries before, has there been any social work input, if so what does that look like, and if there were and if it was appropriate I'd seek to sort of liaise with that social worker to get a bit of an understanding. And then I would sort of consider following that actually meeting with Margaret, and things that I would do is sort of introduce myself and the reason for referral. And I guess my primary goal would be to create a safe space for Marguerite to actually tell her story. And some ways of doing that would to try and seek a private space, which at times in a hospital setting can be really hard. Often people are in 4-bedded bays and there's just a curtain separating people. But often I try and to find a space where we can speak in private. Often there might be one room on the ward that's closed off. So I would try and create have a private space and try and have some uninterrupted time, which can also be difficult in the hospital setting. Pending that, I would some things I'll be mindful is sort of how to build rapport and things that I could do to sort of help Marguerite feel comfortable in speaking about her story. So, for example, might use some positive body language, active listening and paraphrasing things, maintaining eye contact, having a warm tone of voice, being respectful but curious at the same time, and showing genuine concern around her reason for admission and things that have been flagged. I'd also want to get a better understanding of the home situation and what's going on for her. So I will try and ask some open and closed questions to get a better understanding of her home situation, her care needs, how are things going at home, and exploring current supports, informal and formal. Does she have any other family or friends that she trusts? Does anybody else know? If so, what are their thoughts about this? I'd also look at sort of getting an understanding of what's happening for her grandson. What are the reasons that he moved in? We know that sometimes carer stress can be a big risk factor for elder abuse as well. So that's why it's sort of important to see what's happening. So in terms of, she does mention that he's in a bad mood. Is he experiencing any stresses, any financial difficulties? Is he working? How does he cope with stress? Does he use other mechanisms? And does she feel that he also might need some support in terms of, if he doesn't have any finances, Centrelink options and things enforced, just to get a better picture of what's happening and how we can sort of protect Marguerite in this situation. It would also be really important to ask her directly about what her current concerns are and worries, and also raise my concerns in terms of her fall and asking directly, is this a result of being pushed, or what was the reason? If I did have concerns around sort of things, I could also use the domestic violence safety tool assessment to guide me in certain questions as well. And, if I found that she did disclose any incidents of physical, verbal or psychological abuse, I would be very mindful of it and name the experience as violence and highlight the unacceptability of what's happened. And so a way that I might say that is, reframing it as, what you're telling me sounds like elder abuse. Have you thought about this? And see what Marguerite thinks. It would be really important throughout the whole process as well to acknowledge and validate her emotions and experience, and really emphasise that sort of I believe what she's saying and what is happening is not her fault, because you sort of hear it kind of get the sense that she feels that she's a burden in asking for help, and sort of highlight, unfortunately she's not alone, and this does happen quite commonly, and we do see it in the hospital setting, unfortunately. So really sort of pushing, not pushing, we're sort of highlighting my concern and being really genuine in terms of my role is to help you seek support, and you can sort of choose to do as you please with that. I would also, in that, it's really important to see what does she actually want, and in terms of what does she want to happen, what is her ideal outcome, and just giving her a voice and a choice and control over the decision as much as possible, whilst acknowledging that family dynamics are really complicated and complex, and she cares for her grandson, but is difficult to sort of balance all of those things. Does she feel comfortable, speaking to him, which you get the sense that she doesn't. Would she like to put boundaries into place, and how can we support her to sort of have those conversations, or what would make her feel safe to have those conversations? Would also sort of look at planning, safety planning. Does she feel safe to return home? Who does she feel that she can talk to? Does her daughter know of these situations? And put in strategies to minimise the risk, and also look at what is she currently doing to protect herself as well. Keeping all of that in mind, I would also explore and discuss the limitations of confidentiality and sort of explain to her, this is confidential, but there are times when confidentiality is overridden, particularly when there are concerns around safety and well-being. So based on that, in my assessment, I would look at the level of risk and make a judgment for myself. If I did feel there were significant concerns, I could override her wishes not to sort of let the police know under Section 13A, and I could refer to the safety action meeting without consent if I did have those concerns. It would also be really important for me to sort of inform her and educate her on the support services available to her. So whether this might be reporting to the police or seeking advice on an AVO and steps that she could legally do, referring her to a legal advice and advocacy service such as Senior Rights, or referring to practical support at home and community follow-up. For example, we could refer her to Compacts for a 6-week package with assistance with shopping and transport, personal care and meal prep, a referral to ACAT for ongoing services, or referral to the short-term aged care response team, which is START, for case management, trying to navigate the system. Could also provide information about the Ageing and Disability Commission to seek guidance, and I could also, if I had some concerns, seek guidance from them as well. And also talk about alternate accommodation on discharge if she wasn't feeling safe to return home. Does she want to explore respite on discharge to allow some more time to come up with a safety plan and put some things in measures in place? Could potentially also talk about Relationships Australia if she was wanting some tips around sort of mediation or trying to resolve things, and also the men's referral service as well if she wanted some advice around that.
Is that all you do? I mean, that is an enormous range of options that you've given us there. That responsibility is just so enormous. I mean, that represent an enormous number of options for Marguerite to consider. I was just wondering, Aleksandra, whether you could just talk about the importance of the warm referrals as a method, so that Marguerite, particularly if she's elderly, there's a trauma in kind of repeating your story over and over again, and sometimes you may contradict yourself or you may forget some detail that you mentioned in the first instance. So can you just mention the warm referrals and the importance of that system?
Yeah.
We need you to unmute. Can we unmute Aleksandra?
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think it's really important, particularly with sort of older clients that we see, is to actually call the referral service that we're planning to refer them to, and give a bit of a handover and update, so that if the person does wish to seek that service, they don't have to go through most of the questions, and they have an understanding of the situation as well.
Thank you for that. Now, I can't help wondering what the response to Marguerite would be if she were Aboriginal, or if she were from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. And so what do we need to consider in those circumstances? Toni, I would like to come back to you after your lovely acknowledgement of country. Just a reminder that Toni is the Sydney Local Health District principal female Aboriginal health worker in the Domestic Violence Strategy Unit. So perhaps, Toni, you could tell us, if Marguerite were Aboriginal, how might the response differ from the one that Aleksandra's just outlined?
Okay, it wouldn't differ greatly, but the parts that would differ are important parts. So I would hope that Aleksandra would have my contact details just down in Marsden Street. So to let people know that I'm always available for a consultation or just some information and knowledge on First Nations peoples and what they specifically need when something like this. When something like this happens. Normally, because we are a collective society, we would involve the community or some other elders to nip this in the bud if it was a grandson wearing out his welcome and pulling his weight and being a bit abusive. The grandmother's not going to do anything legally wise. We have historical history. We have history with a lot of organisations that not the people working in them currently, but historically that are a big barrier from Aboriginal people accessing. So we'd really be up on our cultural safety. Make that First Nations person, that older person. Our elders are special, and of course everybody's are, but they've looked after these lands for over 60,000 years. They're the people, the children of those people. So I think the community would definitely need to be involved and nip it in the bud, maybe with or without the police, if there is a history or a warrant, because that grandmother would be very scared of Black Deaths in custody, of sending her boy away. So other than the mainstream referrals, we have a lot of NGOs, and we have our own legal, and we have women's groups and women's centres that I can always refer to and give knowledge on, and send resources to all the people I'm collaborating with. Fortunately, elder abuse amongst First Nations people is not as bad as with all the other types of violence. So we'd be treating Auntie Marg the same. We'd be making sure that she was safe. We'd be putting in future referrals for the grandson for his big query, drug and alcohol, maybe, all those underlying intersections that Aboriginal people have. The reason why they are treated holistically for best practice is to deal with all those layers that we have underneath, on top, around, and that, we just have that little bit of extra work to do when there's some violence going on in our community with our people. Yep.
Thank you, Toni. So turning to you, Sharita Shanmuganathan, just to introduce Sharita, she is the Inner West Multicultural Access Project Officer based at Ethnic Community Services Cooperative, which is a not-for-profit organisation that has been supporting and meeting the needs of existing and emerging culturally and linguistically diverse population groups for over 40 years. So let's just put this scenario into that context, Sharita. If Marguerite was from a called background, how might the response be different, taking into account, for example, linguistic barriers?
Absolutely. No, thank you, Caroline. So I guess I will start with, I guess when we're talking about Khal people, we're really talking about people who have migrated, that essentially have left their own country, a country where the cultural heritage is quite different, or can be quite different from the dominant Anglo-Australian culture that we we also have, we can also include, I guess, older refugees, but they're extra stresses when we talk about that. But language-wise, there might be some similarity. Again, it would be quite a similar pathway. However, there are probably certain aspects that might need to be further delved into, or points put on them. For example, for confidentiality, it's paramount for someone from a Khal community. More often than not, this concept may need to be explained several times over, and in several different ways throughout the conversation and the discussions that are had, rather than the more traditional statement at the start of the conversation and at the end. It's really important to weave it into the conversation, and this does take a lot more time and to unpack it, to really ensure that they understand that they're not also going to be penalised for anything they might say. So confidentiality and privacy is of utmost importance. And this is because they may have in the past had many experiences, especially back in their country of origin, where the values of these confidentiality and privacy just have not been respected. Like they've been breached, and they've been breached by people in power. So they've been breached by government, they've been breached by authority figures, and several times over, which is, unfortunately, this is not an unusual situation for them, where they might have divulged something and they've felt let down. So it's a really big one, and just to keep giving them that reassurance that's really needed. So that's a big one. Number two, ensuring that an interpreter is used in this process, and that would be best practice. But you might find that family members are often very helpful and very eager in these situations to help. And it might just be easy, quick, efficient, convenient to use these family members. However, especially when we're talking about abuse and these sensitive issues, you really want to hear from that older person. So really echoing what Aleksandra had said, we want to hear their voice. And so it's really important to facilitate a situation where that older person can have their say. Of course, we do want to hear from the family member as well, because we do need that holistic picture, but that should be separate and on top of what that older person themselves has to say. Now, when working with an interpreter, I just want to highlight a couple of things. Sometimes it is a skill, because interpreters do interpret directly what is said by the practitioner or the worker. It's not their role to try and make it fit better into the cultural context. It's not their role to communicate concepts. It's their role to really communicate words. So this is where the worker really needs to have a look at themselves and how they are passing those messages on. The reason I say that is because in different cultures and languages, there might not be these words that are equivalent to meanings and translations. So as a worker, you sort of want to know how to work most effectively and efficiently with these interpreters to achieve that desired outcome. It's sort of, if you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get the right answer. And that's quite explorative and, again, can be convoluted, but really necessary. There is training that we provide that can help with that, but that's a big one. The other thing, of course, is considering gender roles. And when engaging, interpreters to be sensitive to language dialects as well. So, for example, if you get a Portuguese-speaking interpreter from Brazil, is very different from getting a Portuguese speaker from Portugal, for example. So, understanding the dialects, the gender issues that might come into play, is really big. Now, after saying that, however, working with the CALC population is not just being able to work with interpreters and having translated information. It's not about just having that, it's about having an understanding and awareness of the cultural identity of that individual. So when responding, it's important to understand how their culture, their language, their ethnicity, and their religion impact a person's decision-making, and how forms of abuse can even be perceived. Again, gender roles of the older person within the family unit, family expectations, intergenerational roles, they're all defined by the way we think and therefore our cultural beliefs, whatever that culture is. Closely related is the concept of taboo, stigma, and guilt. So the individual's view of the importance of family harmony and avoiding bringing shame onto the family. That's quite a hard thing, because we're talking about guilt and stigma and what other people think, and it's ingrained in a lot of cultures. It's generations and generations, and and then their ideologies like kismet, fate, destiny, karma, acceptance of situations. What's best for the common good rather than what's best for the individual in a family unit. So these are all huge concepts. I'm just trying to, touch on them.
It's epic. It's an epic amount of different aspects of culture that one has to consider, Sharita. And I just want to pick up on something that's come up in the chat, because I think it's important, and throw back to Aleksandra and then also to you, Sharita, for comment, which is Carol Sherritt says that she's concerned that the focus in this conversation so far has been about physical safety and that we haven't talked about financial abuse. And of course, financial abuse, we know, is the most common form of elder abuse at the moment. And obviously it's often linked to physical abuse, but can we just talk a little bit about money? So Aleksandra, coming back to you, obviously there needs to be a conversation with Marguerite about the fact that she's concerned, she's on the pension, you know, what her financial status is, does her grandson have access to her account? And then perhaps after you've commented on that, Aleksandra, I'd like a rejoinder from you, Sharita.
Yeah, definitely. So financial abuse is very common, something that we see. So as part of our psychosocial assessment, we go through the finances and exactly what you said in terms of, does he have access? Does she have a power of attorney? How is she feeling like that? And we explore ways and strategies to sort of minimize that. So, you know, we could speak about opening another bank account, or you know, cancelling a card if you might have access to her card, and strategies that we could put in place, and also linking her in with legal advice around that as well, because I guess that can be a bit tricky for her to navigate if they're living together as well. So we would try and take a holistic approach and involve her in the process and come up with some strategies to protect her finances and her safety as well.
Sharita, money is obviously also a very sensitive issue. It is in any family relationship, but there are other cultural aspects to this.
Absolutely. Look, it's funny you mentioned, well, it's not funny. When we've done our CAL consultations, there are some groups specifically where that is the one thing that they're really interested, really need more information on. They ask about that. So other forms of abuse, they don't, I'm not sure if it's because of the stigma or it's too confronting. It doesn't seem to evoke as much conversation, but when it's financial, there's so much conversation and questions that they do ask. And we're talking about our CAL elderly that are asking these questions. So we've got, I guess what I've done in the past, you know, you get Centrelink to come in, or you refer to seniors' rights. So because with finance, it does get a bit tricky, Caroline. I probably would leave that to the others. But the fact is they've got lots of questions, and also they're intergenerational. And actually, I've even got that as a point. Family wealth management and how they see it, and how the younger generation see it. And what's really interesting as well with the enduring power of attorney is maybe the child has been told by the grandparent or you know, by their family, this is how they want it to be. However, that person is now not in a capacity and needs to dissolve those finances almost. And there is a bit of a cultural aspect to it as to, do I do what they need, right? Which needs to happen. You need to do what they need right now. However, it's that throwback to, well, they've always said this their whole life. This is what they've wanted to do, and of course, it's to be advantageous to family. However, now that they need that money, how do we manage that? Yeah, that's probably a bit.
The other thorny issue I've just thought of that we haven't raised at all is visa status. So there may be precarious visa status, i.e. bridging visa status for one or the other. It could be the elder, but it could equally be the grandson. And of course, no one wants to see families split up through those circumstances. Is there anything that you want to say about visa status?
Well, not necessarily visa status, but maybe corresponding, we find a lot of sponsorship issues for our elderly, for citizenship. So it really puts our elders at a disadvantaged positions. In many cases, they've been brought over to look after kids, because culturally that's what they do, and that's what they would do. You know, they've given up everything. They've sold their houses back home. They've sold their assets. They have nothing. They've put it possibly all in their kids. They brought it all over this country, and then they don't have access to it. And then they come here, they don't speak the language, they're not aware of their legal rights. They're fearful of being deported back because the sponsors, who are probably their kids, might also go to jail or might be threatened with authority. And they're just not willing to put their kids in that situation. So they've given up everything to come here and help that child. And now they're the ones that are isolated and without support. So that's another really common thing that we have happening. And it's hard even for, I guess, kids to understand that they might even be in this position, abusing them, because it's such a norm. It's so accepted. It's been accepted by all their elders, and because back home that would be the way. They would support them. They'd give everything up to help that child. However, they would have those extra supports available. Now that they've moved country, they don't necessarily have those extra supports, and that's where the issue also comes.
Sharita, one last thing that I wanted to ask you. Do you know off the top of your head how many languages you have interpreters available in?
Oh, not off the top of my head, but we generally not have a problem getting interpreters for a wide variety of languages.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Very
good question.
Thank you for a very comprehensive response there. Fiona Rees, I would like to come to you now. Fiona is the Safer Pathways Senior Clinician for Sydney Local Health District. Fiona, perhaps you could tell us about the safety action meetings and what SAMs could do for Marguerite.
Sure. So firstly, the safety action meetings, or the SAMs.
We might just need you to turn your volume up a little bit or to speak a little closer to your mic.
Sure.
Thank you.
A bit closer. Is this better?
Yeah, a little.
Okay. Firstly, the safety action meetings, or SAMs, are meetings held all around the state. They're chaired by police and they're attended by different representatives from health, from corrections, from housing, from child protection, education, and any non-government services that are involved. And they're coordinated by the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service. So the WDVCAS, the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Services, they have specialist Aboriginal workers and also COLD specialists as well. And the idea is that we meet fortnightly, we share information on risk, and we offer actions from within our agencies to help reduce the serious threat for victim survivors and their children who are identified as experiencing really serious threat from domestic violence and family violence. The idea is to help reduce homicides and really serious situations, but also to get our systems, that are really big and unwieldy and hard to navigate, to be flexible, to be responsive to people going through these sorts of things, and get them what they're needing, I guess, much quicker than normal. Ideally, it is done with Marguerite's consent, obviously ideally, but when it does get to be this serious, there is legislation called Part 13A of the Crimes Act that enables us to share information without consent, but the victim survivors are never compelled to take up any of these offers. So the WDVCAS, the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service, who coordinate, they're the main people generally in touch with that person, so in this situation Marguerite, who will be able to ask her what her fears are, ask her what she's needing and what she's wanting. In this situation, it might be that they talk with Alex, and for Alex to talk with Marguerite about this, just so that there's not too many services involved and overwhelming Marguerite. In terms of referrals, for Sydney Local Health District staff, they ring me and we can go through that assessment of risk. So I'd be talking to Alex. And for people who are not working in the health district, the coordinators for each SAM can be contacted via that WDVCAD main number on the internet. It's 1800 938 227. And for this situation, I absolutely would be contacting that local SAM coordinator to advocate for her to be put on the SAM agenda. There is a standard risk assessment called the DVSAT, which is the Domestic Violence Safety Assessment Tool that Alex mentioned. That can be found online. And in this situation, I think it would meet that serious threat threshold due to her age. She's 82, she's quite frail, she's quite fearful. There was that previous violence as well as that lack of empathy. So when he laughed at her and didn't help her, it's escalating. He's restricting her choices. He's isolating her by preventing her from accepting services. So I imagine that would be put on the safety action meeting. And some examples of what agencies may be able to do in this situation after we discuss, and share information so that we've all got the same picture of what's going on and the same picture of risk. So her grandson may be on a supervision order and being supervised by community correctives. So they might have identified that actually, yes, they can see he's escalating in other ways, and they may be able to address and take some actions with him within that order. I know Marguerite hasn't wanted to report to police at this point, but she may be okay with having a conversation to start with and be able to find out about her options and be able to build that trust with police if that's, she may be taking up those options later on. If someone's a New South Wales housing tenant, then housing may be able to facilitate a priority transfer. WDVCAS are able to support people to get a safe phone if that's what she's needing. And security upgrades can be arranged as well if that's what's needed. And in this situation with Marguerite, I'd be absolutely talking with Alex and with Nicole about what our district health services are able to provide in this situation. And I'd be talking to Toni also if Marguerite was a First Nations woman.
Yeah, you're giving us a lovely sense of a net that's sort of being created around Marguerite to hold her. And for those of you that are wondering about the latest figures in New South Wales, I will tell you that we have 98 new cases. So we've got a bit of a way to go. But your comments, Fiona, segue perfectly into our next contributor, Sergeant Stephen Dewberry. Welcome to the panel, Stephen. Stephen is the team leader of the domestic violence team for the Inner West Police Area Command. His team is responsible for oversight of the command's response to domestic violence investigations and strategies to disrupt and prevent domestic violence. So, Stephen, you've seen Marguerite's case, you've seen the input from Sharita and Aleksandra and Toni. Obviously, for many people, psychologically, the police is seen as a sort of last resort. What would you do if this case presented to you?
Yeah, so, we are sometimes the last resort, but we'd be keen to speak to Marguerite and encourage her to provide a statement with full disclosure about everything that's happened. However, we would be mindful of her vulnerability and that she's reluctant to get her grandson in trouble. One of the advantages of the SAM is that collaboratively we work together towards a best outcome, a proper outcome, and ensure her safety. We promote perpetrators should be held accountable for their actions. We facilitate assertive investigations, and we identify those risks to Marguerite, and we try to put strategies in place to mitigate those risks. But we do all that within the criminal justice system, and we're governed by legislation, including relying on admissible evidence. So far, the information that would have been shared at the SAMs, there's no admissible evidence, it's hearsay. The best practice would be that Marguerite and probably Alex would both provide statements to police. Depending on what information was disclosed in those statements would determine if criminal charges would be preferred. The information disclosed so far indicates that the grandson has committed a number of offences, including assault and intimidation. For criminal justice prosecution, we require admissible evidence to prove the motive beyond a reasonable doubt. That's quite a high threshold. The burden for proof is on the balance of probability, which is a lower threshold. In this case, even without statements having yet been recorded, legislation dictates that police must apply for an AVO when they suspect or believe that a DV offence has occurred, which in this case, we would suspect that DV offence has occurred. And that's information derived from the SAMs. However, we would only not be mandated to take out an AVO if there was a justifiable reason for not taking out that AVO, if that risk or that serious threat could be mitigated some other way. That might be in the interim that Marguerite's in respite, or the defendant is somewhere else, he's removed from that. But our main priority would probably be to take out an AVO. We probably would apply for an urgent AVO, that would be discussed at the SAMs, to protect Marguerite. The AVO would likely include conditions for her grandson not to contact Marguerite or to be within 100 metres of Marguerite's home. Just give her that safety net of him not being around her. There is considerations. Is he her carer? Is she relying on him? But from what the case study we've seen now is that she has independence. And we would discuss those things at the SAMs to ensure that those services were in place. Now, with the provisional AVO to be listed for the next available court date, the DV court would engage with the defendant and we would ascertain if he consent to that AVO. If they declined to consent and in the absence of criminal charges, the magistrate would timetable the AVO. That means that police have 2 weeks to collate our evidence and to file it with the court. The defendant then has 2 weeks to reply to that, and then another week after that, so a total of 5 weeks, the matter would come back to court. So that AVO would have be enforceable for once it's enforced for those 5 weeks. So that gives us, a window of opportunity to make sure those services can be engaged to help Marguerite. Once the AVO is served on the defendant is enforceable, the AVO will provide protection to her and exclude the grandson from the home. Now, once we serve an AVO, we risk assess every fresh AVO for an AVO compliance check. In this situation, police would likely conduct more than one compliance check to make sure that Marguerite understands the AVO, that the grandson understands the AVO, and that it's been adhered to, and there's no contravention of that AVO. The SAM would probably organise, as Fiona said, a safety assessment of Marguerite's home. It may include things like changing the locks, installing CCTV cameras. The SAM's not a platform for case managing Marguerite, but it may be that referral spot that would happen. If this was an incident that wasn't through the SAM, it came from the side, we would then probably engage one of our aged care crime prevention officers to help us with this referral process.
And we have an aged crime prevention officer on the panel. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to come now to you, Senior Constable Kim Hancock. You are the aged care crime prevention officer at the Liverpool City Police Command. So can you give us a sort of sense of the kind of cases that present to you, that you have experience of, and of the roles and responsibilities that you have within your command area?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I can. So I guess my role as the Aged Crime Prevention Officer has twofold. One, I have a proactive role and obviously a reactive role. My title's a little bit, I don't know, it doesn't quite cover off either in regards to all the works that I do, because whilst I do the ageing, I also do disability and homelessness. So I have rather a large vulnerable community that I oversee. But if we're looking at the ageing component of it, very quickly from a proactive component, I would go out to community groups, do presentations. We might talk about, just general safety in regards to how their home is set up, general things when they go shopping again. We certainly have an older generation that still doesn't trust banks, for example. Therefore, they like to withdraw all of their pension in one hit. So, we have those conversations about maybe not carrying so much cash around because they're vulnerable and they're at high risk of being targeted from opportunist crime there. From a reactive patrol, a reactive component, I should say, Marguerite's example of this one, it is unfortunately very common. It's certainly not an isolated incident, and I see this on a regular basis, whether it be an adult child that's returned back to the home or an adult grandchild that's come into the home through, all sorts of various circumstances. Now, depending on how I receive the referral for an incident such as Marguerite's, it could be through the Ageing and Disability Commission, who I work daily with. They're reporters to New South Wales Police if they actually have an incident that's reported to them that has criminality to it, and it's beyond their scope of investigation, and a lot of red flags there. The video actually, did show a lot of red flags there. We've got the financial abuse, we've got the physical abuse, we've got the psychological abuse, and through all of that, Marguerite's being made very isolated. So her ability to actually contact other organisations or speak to other people, the grandson of this incident is really isolating her and removing her from the community, her friends and her other family. So if that report, for example, was to come through to me from, say, the ADC, I would start obviously doing my checks in the background. Has anything been reported? Have we got existing police reports? Then I would try and get in contact with Marguerite, touch base with her there to see where she's at, have those conversations in regards to power of attorney, guardianship, her will. Where is her financial situation? Where do we need to lock down her account to secure her funds and to protect her then? The Australian Banking Association is working very hard with many organisations because, as you were saying, the financial abuse is recognised. We do know that it goes on. So, I've been able to assist our victims in regards to freezing their accounts, making sure that those that shouldn't have access to those funds anymore can no longer access those funds anymore. With that becomes a risk, because if somebody can't obtain those finances that they wanted to, that then creates other risks of some form of other abuse. So what strategies do we put in place then? So again, we'd look at our DV teams and we'd look at AVOs and all those, those sorts of protection orders that we often need to put in place. If this was to come through, a report like this comes from police, we're looking at, again, what else is in place already, what is the history, or again, it might come through, say, for me, I work closely with Liverpool Hospital and come through from a social worker. So what's already in place? Because I'm not there to, we all need to work together when it comes around to all this abuse. So we know from previous, people that have already spoken this morning in regards to their ability to help with power of attorneys, the social work, the risk assessments within a home. As the sergeant said, whether it was me or another officer who's done certain training to go out and do that risk assessment in regards to the setup of the house. But we also, if I go out, I also want to check, what's their bathroom like? Do they have that? Do they have the railings? Do they have, those safety measures in place? Do they have a back to base or something, some sort of call monitor? If they have a fall, those sorts of things I start looking at in regards to not just the criminal element, but what needs to be put in place for further safety for them as well. So there's that reactive role as well.
Kim, do you see an increase in these sorts of cases coming forward when there is a heat wave? We've just had a question from Heather Lawson, who says that we see an increase in cases of domestic violence during heat waves. And I'm just wondering, is there a pattern that you see with this sort of thing spiking?
We probably thought that with COVID, we were wondering how that might impact in regards to our data and all the rest of it. I think at the moment that's fairly consistent, and that could be a few reasons. Obviously, that inability or that fear to be able to contact authorities or be able to report it even to the ADC. With heat waves, look, I can't say I can't comment on that data if there is or isn't. We do know that obviously with isolation is a big issue, and I think that limits people's ability to contact.
When you talk about isolation, Kim, it strikes me that one of the things for Marguerite's generation at 82 is the digital divide, and that baby boomers and successive generations will be used to communicating with tools that are of their generation in a way that we're still seeing a lot of resistance from people in their 70s and 80s. I talk to a lot of older women who say, I don't want a laptop, I don't want the ongoing fees on my pension. So do you think that the digital divide is an issue in terms of personal sense of security and safety?
Oh, I think it definitely is. One, it keeps them, unfortunately, it does mean that a lot are isolated. It gets confusing. I have teenagers and I still ask them for assistance, and I don't fall into the older category yet, getting closer, but that's okay. But I still ask them for assistance. So, you add another 20, 30 years onto that, and it is difficult to comprehend. E-Safety Commission has got a program that they want to get up and running in regards to actually bonding the generations. So we're looking at the older community and then the school kid communities, and the school kids actually are the mentors for the older, how to use your device. Again, under our current climate of COVID means that unfortunately we can't run this program at the moment. And then it's hard because, we're asking older people to jump onto the website to be taught how to use it. Makes it a little bit difficult, but, down the track when COVID settles, and I don't know what normal will be, but when we're back to normal, like to get that program running and engaging not only our generations, but it's a win-win. We're getting our younger people to actually educate our older people. But I think then sometimes we just got to go back to that old phone call. But that puts older people at risk for scams because they will chat, but unfortunately, some of us have good intentions and then others unfortunately don't, and they are at risk of scams as well. So
and they're very, very afraid of that. I know. Thank you for that. I'm going to probably come back to you towards the end of our conversation for more input and comment, but moving along, mindful of the time, and I am taking questions from the chat as we go, so don't worry too much about running out of time. I'm trying to incorporate the questions. But now I'd like to turn to Kate Kennedy. Kate is a social worker at Seniors' Rights Services, working directly with older people experiencing or at risk of abuse. Kate, thank you for your patience. How would you support Marguerite?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Look, I think, well, you've seen actually through, everybody's discussion that we have an extraordinary amount of expertise, well, in the room, but also, to be able to support Marguerite. We're another resource for Marguerite and for the other agencies. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of us. So Seniors' Rights Service is a bit of a one-stop shop, I suppose, for older people to explore their rights on a whole range of issues. We're a community legal centre for older people, and we're also the New South Wales arm of OPAN, the Older Persons Advocacy Network. So we also deliver community education, legal education, education around home care and rights of people in aged care. But I suppose we want to speak directly to the older person. That's that senior. We want to speak to them. We want to find out what's happening with them. We will talk to other family members. We'll provide general information and referral to professionals, for example. But ideally, we want to speak to that older person. And if Marguerite was ringing us, I think for a start, in Marguerite's situation, we, over the phone, it's hard to get all of that, complexity that is going on there. But we would assess her, I'd say, as being at significant risk, and we would refer her to police and to the Ageing and Disability Commission. But through that process, and I think Alex has pointed to it, Fiona as well, that whole way you gather that information and give her that sense of safety in an organisation so that she can actually tell us what's going on. I mean, obviously, if she's unsafe, we would refer. If she would like legal advice and she's actually not in a crisis situation, we can actually offer her My colleague's actually on the panel today too. William, you'll hear from him. He's a solicitor. We actually provide a shared legal social work service where we can provide a bit of a wraparound service for someone who's not in imminent danger, but is looking to explore what her rights might be around, what's happening and what she might want to do with her, about her grandson, for example. We know that, and this is actually quite good because within the, with social work there as well, we can actually support her to actually get that legal advice and provide some warm referrals and follow up. We've also got an aged care advocacy service, and sometimes someone like Marguerite might ring the advocacy service to talk about the fact that, she hasn't got any home care. Now, we know from the case study that home care has been stopped from coming in through her grandson, and that's a massive red flag, as other people have pointed out. But without that crisis situation, our advocacy service could be linking her back into home care. They could be talking with her to My Aged Care to get her registered for a reassessment. Those sorts of things is what our advocacy team can do. I think other people have pointed to the fact that Marguerite's case is, in a way, it's quite common, as Kim said, but also we see a lot more complexity in many cases with those cultural factors. There might be mental illness, there might be a history of trauma, and other people have mentioned family violence or domestic and family violence over time. This could be intergenerational. She might be, somebody who's experienced domestic violence in her past. So, all of these intersecting factors can make it actually really difficult for that older person, as other people have alluded to. So it takes time to build trust. And, that would be what we would be doing, is to build that supportive framework for her to be able to explore what she wants to do. And the benefit of the collaborative approach is that she can actually get other specialised help and services without having to tell her story and retell her story. So that offering of, we've just talked about warm referrals, that idea that, she actually doesn't, we can, with her permission, pass on her information for other agencies to follow up. And we work really closely with a lot of the organisations on the collaborative. You'll hear from Kerry from the ADC, from the Ageing and Disability Helpline. We work really closely with them, also with Relationships Australia, with health, START, for example, some of those great acronyms that we're trying to interpret today. But also a shout out to those local collaborative members, such as the council, Mary's, role, those specialised community organisations like Sharitas that are actually really important resources and starting points for us to help Marguerite, because they're actually on the ground in the inner west. We're a larger New South Wales wide service, and often limited by phone. So we really do rely on some of those local connections, and Marguerite is protected by some of those connections to community. We know that's a key protective factor.
You mentioned OPAN there, Kate, and the number for OPAN is now up in the chat, and It is 1-800 700 600. And also we have provided a list of those pesky acronyms so that you can scroll through them in the chat and see what some of those mean. And you touched there on some other factors that we haven't come to yet, but which I am going to raise. And that one of those, of course, is cognitive decline. How complicating that is, if that's another aspect to Marguerite's narrative, to her scenario. But let's just come now to William. William Maynard is a practicing lawyer. He's been a practicing lawyer for 39 years and has worked in private practice and government. He was also principal solicitor at a community legal centre for many years and is now happily back in the community legal centre world at Senior Rights Services since 2021. William, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that's been sort of mentioned just in passing is the notion of guardianship. So could you perhaps give us a little bit of a sense of the landscape of how a legal service can support someone like Marguerite in terms of things like wanting to have their adult child or grandchild, like David in this scenario, leave the house, and what the sort of guardianship aspects could be?
Certainly I will. Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Yes. Well, guardianship is a very useful legal mechanism. I would say that Marguerite has capacity. She seems to speak well about her situation and understand the abuse she's suffering. Therefore, she would be able to appoint a guardian herself with a fairly simple document, and we could support her in that. And often, as well as guardian, the person is appointed financial manager. Both those documents are usually made enduring documents, which means that they remain in force after the person loses capacity. They're very useful documents that really every elderly person should have and think about those matters. In this case, may I say, though, that I think we do have a situation of urgency. There is abuse. There is, most importantly, physical abuse and fear. And there is, to some extent, financial abuse as well. I hope, is that satisfactory on guardianship, Caroline? Thank you, because I just want to quickly address the urgent situation, and Kate and I have had similar situations. The first challenge is to get the person to take action for various reasons, and that's something that to some extent is non-legal, and it's most helpful to have colleagues like Kate to assist. But I was very impressed with Officer Stevens' description of the AVO process. As someone who's often recommended AVOs to clients, I see that the process is even better than I thought, because there's an ongoing check in the process. When I heard the case study, I wanted immediately to recommend to Marguerite that she contact the police, and that, as Officer Stevens said, an AVO application would be made. That is very important, because that deals with the physical abuse. I would only add to what Officer Stevens said this. In the case study, it's important to note that Marguerite is concerned that her grandson shouldn't get into trouble. Unfortunately, he's already been in trouble. He's been in jail. So it's important to tell clients that to be subject to an AVO is not in itself a criminal offence. To have an AVO taken out against you in the vernacular is not meaning that you've committed a criminal offence. To breach the AVO is a criminal offence. And so we would have protection for the grandson, and we hope that this would encourage Marguerite to take that important step, which gives her legal protection, which is just essential in the case study. And it's all the more that I say that because, unfortunately, the legal process for evicting an adult child or grandson is not so effective. It requires a letter to vacate, and that in itself can be very helpful because it puts the person on notice. You're not a guest here. You have fantasies that you're contributing. You have fantasies that your elderly relative is happy with the situation, but they're not happy with the situation. And when a notice is issued, they're on notice that they must vacate. Unfortunately, though, often those notices are ignored. And if the person's a tenant because they're contributing, unlike this person, then you have to go to the New South Wales Civil Administrative Tribunal. And if they're not contributing, like this person, and they become a trespasser after issue of a notice to vacate, remarkably, you have to go to the Supreme Court to get orders, which is a cumbersome process. So although those steps can be taken, the reality is that in this case, the focus is on the abuse. And as Officer Stevens said, the good thing, so to speak, is that a standard part of an AVO order is that you do not come within 100 metres of the person in need of protection. Well, clearly, this grandson, David, I think, is going to have to move out. And that's all to the good, because that's what we want. So I hope I've outlined there the effective legal remedy in this case, while also pointing out that the remedies where there's been no abuse are in place, and just the issue of a letter to vacate can wake the person up and help put family pressure on them. To actually go through with the whole process may need legal aid, may need, if the person has means or family member has means, a private solicitor. It is cumbersome.
Thank you, William. I'm particularly grateful for you addressing the urgency there, and also the clarification about the AVO, that is not something that means that you get a criminal record as a result of an AVO being imposed. So thank you very much for clarifying that. I'd like to come to Kerry Marshall. I'm aware of the fact that we've got about 15 minutes left. There's another OPAN number that's been posted in the chat. Kerry is the manager of the Ageing and Disability Helpline of the Ageing and Disability Commission. So Kerry, I was wondering whether you can tell us what the difference is between the Senior Rights Service and the Ageing and Disability Commission's helpline, so that we get a sort of sense of demarcation here.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. And Kate or William, please do bounce in at any time for some clarity around this one. But what I thought would be helpful is really to go through some of the key functions of the Ageing and Disability Commission. So we are, I guess, first of all, the overarching agency in New South Wales for receiving reports regarding abuse, neglect and exploitation of older people and adults with disability. In response to those reports, we may do one of four things or a combination. So what we do is receive reports or allegations of reports, and those reports can come from anybody really, community professionals or the person themselves that is experiencing abuse. In relation to those reports, we are able to conduct preliminary inquiries, share information, or it might be referred on to our community support team for some ongoing roles and case coordination there. Another one of our roles is to raise awareness that is similar to Seniors Rights Service, and we do have a memorandum of understanding with Seniors Rights Service in supporting each other to raise awareness of abuse, neglect and exploitation in the community. Another one of our roles is to conduct investigations. I know everybody's very interested in our role in conducting investigations. It would take me a long time to explain it all to you, but we do actually have significant powers within our legislation that enable us to do so. And we report, another, I guess, important function of the Commission is that we report to the government related systemic issues around abuse, neglect and exploitation. So we, I guess, over time, we look at, even from forums such as today, what are some key themes coming through? How do we feed those back up to higher level within government to inform policy and development? It doesn't really answer your question that much in how we differ from seniors' rights. I guess seniors' rights, as Kate was saying, has a little bit more of a legal slant and support for those coming through for the advocacy and legal systems. Kate, have you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I sort of think of the, I mean, Kerry manages the helpline, which sits at the front of the commission, and I think, I sort of see it as an overarching organisation that is really legislated to provide that response, and and has some investigation powers. Where we provide sort of broader rights-based, I suppose, services around. I mean, obviously Kerry's got there's some rights there too, but I just think in terms of we're broader. We deal with all sorts of issues, whereas Kerry's day-to-day, their work is around abuse, exploitation, and neglect, and mitigating and responding to that. So I think and for the people that are out there in the audience who are looking, because there's a lot of organisations having it, involved in this discussion. I think for everyone to know that, wherever you kind of make the inquiry, obviously ADC is a really great starting point. I think for that, because they speak to anyone. I should have said that better, Kerry, but they speak to the community as well. We like to speak directly to the older person. But, if there's a community member who's concerned about, their neighbour, for example. So, I suppose that's a differentiator as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'd like to come now to Nicole Pryor. Nicole is the Domestic and Family Violence Workforce Program Manager for Sydney Local Health District, working in the Domestic and Family Violence Strategy Unit. She's a senior social worker, clinician and manager, and experienced in responding to and developing policy to guide best practice in domestic and family violence. Nicole, looking at this case, Marguerite's case, and listening to the input and all these responses so far, are there other considerations from your perspective that you'd like to highlight? And we need you to be unmuted first. Have we got you unmuted? Not yet. Can you unmute?
Sorry, Caroline, have you got me there?
That's okay.
Yeah, some technical issues. Okay, yes, thank you. Look, I guess I'd just like to start by, highlighting that the disclosure that we get from Marguerite is really a perfect world situation. And also that the interagency collaboration that takes place here in this case study isn't always how real life situations play out. And I think it's important to acknowledge some of the challenges that we might face when we're responding to abuse of older people in the real world. So firstly, we may not receive a full disclosure like this. And in fact, we might actually pick up on some more subtle indicators. It might not be as clear if abuse is actually taking place or not. And we may have limited information available to us to assess level of risk. So when it isn't clear, it's important that we're still escalating our concerns to our line managers and working with them and others in our organisations to figure out the best way to be responding. Also, we should be referring to and working in line with our organisation's policy frameworks, and where possible, drawing on expert knowledge that's available to guide us. So when things aren't as clear, as we said, we can consult with the Ageing Disability Commission or with specialist violence, abuse and neglect services. Or we can access expert knowledge that's available to us within our organisations. And this also includes consulting with the agencies represented here on this collaboration. So when we can always talk about a case in a non-identifiable way to get some advice. So it's important that workers who are responding to abuse know that they're not alone, that there are organisations like on this collaboration that can support them and advise them on how to best to be responding. In having said this, I think it's also important to note that it's not always helpful to have a lot of agencies involved at the same time. There can be repercussions for introducing too many services. So where there's complex family dynamics, information may get misconstrued, or it could place someone at higher risk. For example, in Marguerite's case, her grandson may react violently to increased interest. So in this case study, Marguerite discloses to a hospital social worker. However, she could disclose to anyone. She could have disclosed this to a home care worker. So whoever picks up this disclosure needs to respond to that initial allegation of abuse, not on their own, but in consultation with their line managers and within the organisation to determine who the key agency or agencies should be to be responding to that individual situation. So, for example, a home care worker may refer to the ADC or to senior rights or to health and police, depending on the situation. And these agencies will change depending on what the primary concerns of that person's situation are. So once the key agencies are identified, for effective collaboration, we need to have really good communication to be able to effectively respond to abuse. So workers responding should have a clear plan or an understanding about the role of each agency in responding to that individual situation. So this involves knowing who's responsible for leading for the case and who owns what role in responding to the actual abuse. And it's also critical that we're working in a trauma-informed way. So we don't want to have multiple agencies asking a victim survivor the same question unnecessarily and asking them to repeat their stories to different providers, which can be re-traumatising. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge that in the real world, we have wait times for services. And often we need to really strongly advocate to get someone like Marguerite seen in a timely way. When we have concerns about abuse, it's important that we ensure our referrals use language that accurately reflects the level of risk and the urgency of the situation. Referrals, I know we've mentioned this, should be warm referrals And we may need to use our networks like this collaborative to escalate referrals. Also, just to mention the safety action meeting, the SAMs that Fiona and Stephen and Kim were referring to, may be a way of fast tracking referrals for clients at serious threat level.
Thank you, Nicole. That was very comprehensive. And also thank you for that reality check, which reminds us all that, you know, not everybody follows the Marguerite script. Not everybody is Marguerite. There are different patterns of referral in terms of the sort of first point of contact and where you go from there. And also, as I've said, we have not used as a case study this time someone suffering from cognitive decline or dementia, and I think that it would be really useful for us to do that in a follow-up session, because that does have enormous complicating factors. I am going to overrun just by a few minutes because I think there's still a little bit to cover off, and I just want to come finally to Megan Frost. Thank you for waiting, Megan. Megan is the Senior Relationships Practice Specialist for Relationships Australia, New South Wales, and that includes being responsible for the Let's Talk Elder Mediation and Support Service. So Megan, if we're talking about Marguerite, and let's imagine that she continues to refuse services, can you talk to us a little bit about how Relationships Australia could stay involved with her and provide her with some very maybe basic counselling, just to kind of keep her in contact with someone?
Yes, thanks, Caroline. Marguerite and her family and her situation may come to us in many different ways. It might be Marguerite, it might actually be her daughter who we hear of, who gets spoken to in the bathroom, who calls about us and concerns. And as we've mentioned before, that we work very closely with other organisations. So we do work very closely with Kate and her team at Senior Rights, and we also work very closely with Kerry and her team at the Ageing and Disability Commission. So what we do is we also want to speak with Marguerite. It may not be the first person we get to speak to, and it might take time. So we're not your crisis response. We're the people who might work alongside you for the whole way. We might refer to you or be referred to. The clarity of role and the making sure we're not competing and completing. Sorry, someone just walked into my room. We're not asking her to do the same thing again. So we work in counselling. What we would do is would hear her and make sure that she realises that she is of value. That would be undermining the ageism that we see permeated through this story. Maybe I'm just too old. Possibly that sense of entitlement that grandson has to resources and to support. And sometimes that's the gently challenging with him. It's very difficult for someone to kick a family member out when there's no support services to hold them. And that's a reality. And she may choose to live in a really difficult and challenging situation rather than have her grandson kicked out. So we work with her, and hopefully we'll be able to engage and work with David too. So our job is to listen, to hear, to make sure people have the advice and the supports that they need. We want to make sure that Marguerite's heard, but we also wanting to support the family relationships going forward, but in a safe way and a healthy way. So that takes time, and that could be individual counselling, it could be some other counselling, or it could actually be bringing people together and having a conversation about what needs to be different for Marguerite moving forward. And we may invite other services into that, either directly in the meeting or as meetings beforehand. So it is really important that we hear Marguerite, that we know other services, and that we're able to work together and not rush her and respect her voice and her wishes, but also make sure if safety needs to happen. And that's where that threshold comes, is when does she have a choice around whether she puts up with a really rubbish situation, and when do we actually say, no, this is too unsafe, and that we need to be working with other services as well.
That's so interesting, because I hear from a lot of people that there is a kind of implicit trade-off, that a certain number of people suffering elder abuse say to themselves, well, it's worth suffering this kind of abuse because I need someone in the house. It is a member of my family. You know, they make these sort of internal bargains with themselves. And you mentioned, David, in passing there. So in terms of support through an organisation like Relationships Australia, I was very aware when watching See What You Made Me Do, Jess Hill's extraordinarily good series on SBS, that there are lots of new programs now to help perpetrators and to help them to come to terms with their impulse towards violence. So what sort of support is there for David?
We would need to engage David for him to have support. And so depending on what other people have done along the way, he may get offered support at different points of time, whether it been to us, like, it just depends. We are able to offer courses such as Taking Responsibility. That's a men's behaviour change course. And we're able to offer supportive caseworker alongside of that to protect the people in that person's life. So there is support there for him. It's around engaging and helping him see. Sometimes a person like David doesn't like his situation either. He doesn't want to be living with his grandma, and I'm not excusing what he's done, but in terms of, if we are able to offer more choices and options, and it takes time. Some of this can take a long time. And also in terms of, as Kerry was saying, the systems, are there support service around? Are there places for him to go? Like, the range of options in reality may not be high. And sometimes bringing the other family members in. So with this kind of situation, we wouldn't just be talking with Marguerite and David. We'd be looking at who else in Marguerite's network, particularly her daughters in mind. There might be other children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, neighbours, support services, home care services that we'd want to be bringing in as well, and broadening the network of responsibility as well.
Thank you. Now, I hope you can all unmute simultaneously, because this is the sort of final kind of plenary opportunity for you to make any comments that follow up from the conversation that we've had, those of you on the panel. So is there anything else that anyone wants to mention in terms of additional services or insights that you would like to offer into this scenario that we've looked at in some detail this morning? Anyone who wants to comment on the issue of cognition as another factor? So please, we've only got a couple of minutes left now, but if anyone's dying to say something, this is your chance. So Kerry, yes.
Hi. Look, I just thought many people have mentioned the Ageing and Disability Commission, so I thought I would very quickly let you know what might you expect if you do call us. So if I use this case study as an example, and we have a social worker calling, obviously Aleksandra is very capable of responding. We heard that from her. But often social workers are really unsure, if you work for an agency and you're unsure, you can simply call us and even ask for some help. How do I go about this? So that's the first option we can provide. What we will do is work with you from the short-term imminent issues through to what is your long-term plan for this person and how do you safeguard them. So if you are a social worker calling, we might help you with questions such as, Marguerite said that he just gets angry sometimes. We would say to you, use a question that might elicit a response from her, such as, and what happens when he gets angry? There are specific questions that you can ask that elicits responses from people, so that help you assess the risk really well. And she might say, well, he yells at me. What does he say when he yells at you? Where is he usually standing? Is he right up in your face? Questions like that. Does he ever threaten to hurt you when he's yelling? I know you're saying he may not have hurt you, but does he threaten to harm you? And all of this then becomes further information around assessing the risk and what referrals you might need to make. On top of that, we might talk to you about your duty of care and your ability to refer to different agencies utilising your duty of care. Or what is your policy? If you work for health, what is your policy? Really important to know, if you call the Ageing and Disability Commission, there are protections under our legislation for you to call us and report a situation of abuse, neglect and exploitation. There's protections from both civil, criminal and disciplinary actions if you are to call us and report a case of abuse. So really just wanted to, I guess, let you know what would our first phone call look like. Often it's that imminent risk. Again, we might say, are you showering Marguerite while she's in hospital? Is there any further evidence? Is there any bruising? Are there clinicians? Can you get the doctors to have a look at that bruising and see, do they think that it is that it goes with the description of a fall, or does it look like there's possibly something else? So often we might talk to you for a few weeks, even a few days while you go through this process, but our job is to support you. And then if things don't work out, we can actually take that case on. Or if Marguerite chooses to go home and you deem her not to be at high risk, then you can ask her, would she like to be referred to us, and we can continue with her along with all the other agencies you've linked her with.
Okay, I'm going to have to wrap it up now. I think that's been a really comprehensive, I hope it's been a comprehensive overview for those of you who have been watching, and helps you to feel that you are not alone if you are in this circumstance, and you're not alone if you're helping people who are navigating this situation. Can I urge all of you who attended today, please do not leave this forum without filling out the poll, which Sandra, who has been managing us superbly in the back room, thank you Sandra, is going to launch now. And can I thank all of the panel for their generous wisdom and expertise today. Can I thank all of you and wish you all to stay warm, to stay well, and to get vaccinated. Thank you very much. And this will, of course, be posted and available online. And there is further information to extract from the very, very good comments in the chat room today. Thank you all.